Welcome to the second part of our special program co-produced with TV47. I'm Beatrice Marshall with CGTN.
And I'm Victor Muyakane with TV47.
Victor, in our last episode, we talked about the massive potential of Africa's youth. What impressed you the most?
Oh, wow. I was impressed by the grasp on the issues that the young people have. It looks as if Africa's youth, the leadership of Africa is using a massive 10,000 horsepower bulldozer as a school bus. There's a massive underutilization of African youth for African solutions to African problems. And that's what really impressed me. But also that there's so much potential. There's clarity of vision, clarity of ideas, and ingenuity and resilience, persistence, and hope.
Indeed, a lot of potential with African youth. In this week's program, however, we'll explore ways to empower our youth in Africa. Before we do that, let me introduce our guests. Here in Nairobi, Kasmuel Makure, artist and youth activist, and also with me in Nairobi, Nerima Wako Ojiwa, Executive Director at Siasa Place. Also joining us
via Zoom is Edwin Ikworia, an international development and policy advocacy expert, joining us from London. And we also are joined by an audience of students from Daystar University in Nairobi. Welcome to you all.
Edwin, let me come to you here because it is now widely acknowledged that Africa does indeed have a youth crisis at all levels, but also a huge potential. So let's talk solutions. If you can mention just one thing in each case, what lesson can African countries learn from elsewhere and which homegrown solutions it must devise?
The German case is a key example where they have the dual education system. And the idea here is that you do not need to be a degree holder for you to be functional in society, for you to be recognized as an expert, as a skilled person in your work. That fusing of apprenticeship, working with the private sector to make sure that young people are getting the needed experience and the government paying for that. That's the key thing I really think Africa can learn from that. Working with the private sector who are job creators, who are investing in their businesses, who need these employees, by the way, train them on the job. They get a stipend for that. And then these people come out skilled and experienced, and then they get absorbed by the industry. That is a key example that I think Africa can borrow from. Another one that I thought was key is the idea of transforming the agricultural sector. And I think the example of China is quite key here, where because Africa particularly has a large portion of their population involved in the agricultural sector, as long as agricultural productivity is still very low, it is very discouraging for young people. And so whatever investment we can put in the sector to transform the sector to a modern way of farming and producing food and producing textile and cotton and groundnut and horticulture, whatever that is not with the drudgery of cutlass and hoes as it was in those olden days. Young people will flock into that system, and that itself can generate a lot of opportunities for African young people. So in terms of solutions, those are some of them. And for homegrown ones, I think Rwanda is a key example of how they're infusing technical and vocational education training with the education system, how they are putting a lot of money through the Young Entrepreneurs Fund, to provide capital that African young people need, to get into new startups and producing, using innovation to produce new services and even creating markets for agricultural products. Those are examples that I think Africa can really leverage to engage its young people.
You've talked about how young people want to take charge of their future through governance. You look at Africa's leadership tends to be on the maturer side. How do we integrate younger people into leadership positions?
Many of them are trying within political parties. Because of the system that we have, to enter, you enter in a political party. Very few people actually make it in as an independent candidate. When we look at the statistics of our political parties, majority of the actual party members are young people. But the ones who participate in the primaries, you hardly see the large number of young people participating. And even those who try, parties find ways to put the people who have paid for the ticket on the ballot. And that's where a lot of young people get locked out. But if they organize now, start joining parties now, start getting voters' cards now, they will be able to influence parties from within. Because what I see as a challenge in our country, the laws are there, the policies are there. Politics is about who gets what and how. If you don't have the right person saying, we need this to go here this way, we've lost the game.
Right. Casmuel, I want to come to you because you're talking about, and you talked in your previous program about reimagining a new continent, how to get there, how to reconfigure society. What do young people want to see in a new Africa?
I think I would be preposterous to speak for all young people, but I would try and maybe paint a picture. We want an Africa in which we can thrive, because currently, as things stand, we are barely surviving. And that's why you will find, if you think about it, the correlation of the youth bulge, even with violence, you'll find that if you were to think about it critically, the people who have like the highest tendency to be suicide bombers are very highly educated men in the engineering field. If you think about these moving parts, we would need, one, a system that works for us, and not us finding ways to integrate into the current system, us finding ways to rethink the system. And that might necessarily mean phasing out the people who are holding on to these punitive practices. And that's part of what the youth are agitating for. In so doing, once we've eased off the pressure from a political point, because I also believe the personal is political, once we've eased off into good governance and tapping into our potential, it's important for us as young people to be allowed to chart our own paths, make new mistakes, figure life out on our own, try and say that this is what we think this is the direction we would love to go. Because a lot of people are stuck in history to say that this has not worked for us before. It's like driving while looking in the rear view. We will have to get to the point where we've rid ourselves of the shackle of the fear of what could it be, or this is what has not worked for us before, into imagining a new world for ourselves.
Right. Edwin, I want to get your thought here. How can this new Africa, or this new look that the African youth want, how can that be achieved? And can it be achieved?
It will be achieved. It's not even it can it be. It will be achieved. It's either whether it's achieved through a normal process of transition, or it gets achieved by violence. One of the things that I know young people have been doing, and that has been working and celebrated globally, is our culture and arts, which I think my colleague in the studio would totally agree. One of the biggest exports of the African continent is the arts, right? And it's beginning to create a new narrative for the African continent in terms of its potential, in terms of the creativity. So it just requires the right policy space to lean into this new narrative that the potential is here. That is one. In terms of the natural resources that we've been blessed with, the question is about how do we transform the governance of the natural system by letting institutions work. And the case in point here is, as young people come together, as they organize more and organize better, they can use the existing laws to demand accountability. It is not even a lack of policies. It's really about accountability for existing policies that can even lead to these transformations. So there is what we need to do on the African continent in terms of the governance, in terms of participation, in terms of inclusion not in a tokenistic way that it has been happening, but in a really integrated way that shows and leverages the strength of the young people. What does that mean? It means that young people get their quota to be in government. It is required by law that certain age restrictions are taken out of our constitutions, out of our electoral laws. It is required by law that a certain percentage of parliament must be these people, must be at this age, so that all the kinds of demographics are represented. I do believe that intergenerational dialogue is critical for this transformation to happen. So we do not necessarily need to take away those old people out so that young people can be there, but there needs to be a cross-fertilization. That is when we can truly get inclusive development.
All right. And still with you, Edwin, before we shift, apparently every year about 10 to 12 million young people enter the labor market, against a supply of about 3 million jobs, formal jobs for that matter. And observers have said that the starting point of changing this course needs to be, of course, rethinking our education systems. So I have a set of questions for you and everyone that we have here. First of all, what fundamental changes are needed in Africa's education system? You did touch on this a little bit earlier with your comparisons. And second, What are those in-demand skill sets today, in today's labor market in Africa? And indeed, how can we address the mismatch? Over to you, Edwin.
Our education system is not matching with our sectors, not matching with the opportunities that we have. So where we produce graduates of all kinds of disciplines, I do not want to mention specific one because no one is, I mean, there are a bunch of them that are not relevant for the industries that are on the ground. When I say industries, I do not mean manufacturing only. I mean, for instance, abundant arable lands we have on the African continent, abundant access to renewable energy that we have on the African continent, the infrastructural gaps that we have, the gaps in IT infrastructure that we have. All of these gaps, if our education system is producing people to meet these gaps, and then we create an enabling environment for the investment to flow in, it is almost automatic that development would be the natural fallout of that. But our skills and our education system is designed to, I would say, go up, in the days of teach people to become workers in an industry that does not exist. That is a challenge. So fundamentally, we need to shift that and do a needs assessment. Every country on the African continent needs to ask, what are the sectors that are available in Africa, in this country, and which people do we need to work them? That is fundamental. Otherwise, we'll continue to churn out plenty graduates and out of that. Then the second thing I would say, I know that it's time, is how do we transform our informal system, our informal sectors? It is so fundamental. 80% of Africa's private sector is in the informal space. It means that we do not contribute to pension, we do not contribute to, in fact, we cannot even be taxed because we are not even known. Registration is very limited, and I think my sister talked about the fact that it is so cumbersome to register a company. How do we dismantle those structures to allow the informal sector become more formalized? And that in turn generates data. That data tells us how we can create more employment, how we can incentivize the system to produce more entrepreneurs. Those are some fundamental shifts that need to happen. Otherwise, more graduates, by the way, it is 62 million young people that are not in employment, not in training, and that are not gainfully employed in any way. That is disaster waiting to happen. We need to emphasize that.
So Nerima, I want to come back to the issue of leadership and how the youth can take up the leadership mantle. But first of all, do you think young people want to lead?
Yes, I know they want to lead. In 2022, when we look at the number of young people who actually stood up for elective politics, it was almost 2,500 of them. Those who were elected, young women, the number actually dropped. Only 14 young women got elected, while the rest are nominated. Majority are nominated. And when we talk about young men, about 380 were elected. So the number is increasing for men. For women, it's actually just increasing very, very little. Our politics is becoming more violent, but leadership is not just political leadership. There's leadership everywhere. And so even when we look at business, when we look at other sectors, technology, we're seeing young people with very innovative ideas and working really hard to be able to lead in their industries.
Right.
Yeah, so yes, they want to lead.
Well, they do want to lead, and still on the subject of youth and leadership, Kasmil, it appears inclusion is no longer the aim. It's not just about a seat at the table. They want a place in the kitchen.
Right.
Talk to us about what proposals you have that can allow young people to be integrated into those levels of leadership that Nerima was talking about: political, academia, tech, industry, spiritual even.
Right. I think a lot of this comes with time, because just also as we've said it, as our culture dictates, is that there's an age hierarchy type of thing, and there are certain positions which you can only occupy once they take a bit of time. Like, for example, if you're going to be a professor, and going back to what's a problem which I think made our industries awash with horrible professors, is you would just become a professor because you would bring the most funding to a department of a university, not because you were actually interested in that. And you would find at some point people thought the best way into public service was through the universities. So nobody was educating people because they actually love to educate. They were looking at that not as an end, but as a means to public service. So in the overglorification of these political posts, we find that we lose a lot of value. So part of what we need to do as young people in that kitchen, getting into the kitchen process, is by collaboration and not control. So part of what we do is building up on the work such that I do not have to start another organization because Nerima runs Siasa Place, and there's a lot of ground they've covered in terms of political and legal growth. I will onboard myself as a person who's very vocal as a leader and say, hey Nerima, I need to know what I need to do to navigate these kinds of spaces.
Right.
The only way we will integrate and come to that table and even rebuild is if we collaborate. And the thing which unites us is, we are living under, all of us are not doing well financially. So part of our struggles are going to unite us and help us, I think, tie us together. If we collaborate, we do not even need to integrate, because if we were to run an election just based on the youth without touching any of the votes of the two proposed in our false dilemma, we could still come up with a president. So it's part of doing those things, the collaboration and the re-education and the reimagination of our politics.
So, Edwin, let me bring this to you. It does seem that the young people want to be heard. It does seem that the young people want to be on the table. What are the most effective ways, in your view, to engage the youth to ensure that those voices are heard and heard clearly?
Young people are already leading. It is just that we don't have a critical mass yet. And that's what we need to get to. What do I mean by that? Take about the fintech space. It's amazing how young Kenyans, how young Nigerians, how young South Africans, how young Africans are taking over the fintech space. And I thought we should mention that. So in terms of politics, they may not have been there yet. But if you take over the industry, and this is what I want to emphasize, if you take over the industry, you take over the academia, even in academics, I agree that you need a long time to become a professor, but I tell you that most of the young researchers today are young people. I mean, researchers who are innovating, who are expanding the frontiers of knowledge are young people. Go all over Europe. You see young Africans dominating the landscape. And I really want us to recognize that. But it's not a critical mass yet. And I think the question of collaboration and finding opportunity, and when you get there, creating opportunity for others to come into the space is one key way to go. So, but in politics, there are some fundamental changes that needs to happen on the African continent. First of all, is money politics, because when you put money at the top of the political agenda, young people may not be able to find their way there because they haven't made money. And so we need to think about how do we demonetize politics in Africa so that when you are qualified and you're interested and you're passionate, you can really participate. And I think our colleague in the studio talked about the fact that a number of people will contest, but very few get elected. And I can tell you that within party structures, they are not able to afford even the nomination fees or the fees to buy the forms to be able to contest, even though you are in the parties. They are afraid of the power of the young people. But when young people demonstrate value, they are given the space. I can tell you, Rwanda is still an example. Even though people have different dimensions of that, the number of young people in the civil service, it's amazing, it's transformational, because they are innovative, they are capable. And when they got the opportunity, they actually lead to transformation. So digital cities are run by young people. So if we are able to create value, demonstrate value, we will get the opportunity because of the value we bring. So young people should continue to demonstrate value and they will get there. But the political environment needs to be reformed to allow that to happen. And that takes political will. And I'm not sure we have reached there yet in Africa.
Right. Now, to our audience, I noticed some of you were just enraptured by what was going on. You were nodding quite seriously. Have you got a question or a comment on this? Anyone indeed that has? Yes, please. Let's have your question.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Kaibere. I'm an author, a student at Daystar, taking communication electronic media. I love that we have talked much about good governance, but I think we are forgetting to emphasize on the other tenet that is deeply interconnected with good governance, and that is good leadership. And my question goes to Cosmo. How do we teach our parents and part of the youth to stop choosing leaders based on their ability to rabble-rouse and choose leaders because they have built capacity to solve issues that are in our country. Thank you.
I am a firm believer that we need functional systems. I believe in structure of a form, such that if we have good structures, even if we elect a bad person, it would work still. So I don't believe that systems should be dependent on the goodness of a person, because then what happens if, God forbid, the good person dies? Ideally, the systems are supposed to be there. But what we're realizing is, while our tribe is the constitution, that's what the Gen Zs have said. We are tribe Katiba. Katiba is Swahili for constitution. As we build good structures, let's also find good people to show us how these structures would run, such that we have a good car with an experienced driver. So part of what we need to do is not necessarily cause like an uprising and whatnot. What we need to do is, one, as we keep on changing our culture, also try and push for good structures. And if we have good structures that are working, have good people in those structures, we can always do that. It could be elective, it could be, I don't believe it will be with these people, but more people of our generation need to rise up and occupy these spaces.
So let me talk to people of your generation.
Right.
Is there a sense of hopelessness, or is there a sense of hope for the future potential?
There's absolutely a sense of hope. If we were hopeless, we would not be doing this. And I think that's why even these kinds of questions are coming, and we're asking ourselves, that's why we are not worried. If you ask any Gen Z, so what next? They're like, don't know, we're just vibing. We're like, yeah, we'll figure it out. But then the older generation, how I know this is a person I don't want to waste my time talking to, is if they're obsessed with the question, what next? Because the people who are obsessed with the question, what next, are part of the establishment that are worried. But we're like, the system that we have currently did not work for our grandparents, did not work for our parents, did not work for our elder siblings. We're still unemployed, and they're asking us, what next? We're like, currently, this is not working. So we are imagining, and that's why I'm saying, don't you dare lose hope, don't you dare buy into the narrative of people asking what could be next. All I'm saying is, let us work together in the imagination of a beautiful, possible future that we have not yet conceptualized. And the only way we can bring that is by collaborative thinking and by us daring to occupy.
All right. Do you have a question from the audience? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Ingrid Wanjera Kalsvik. I am a Daystar student studying communication. My question would be to Edwin. He touched on unlearning and resolving the financial aspect in determining leaders and everything. If it was up to you, how would you tell that somebody is fit to be a leader in, like, if it was put in your hands entirely, like you determine and give us a list of how to find the right candidate?
Just show me what you've done before. Show me how you have succeeded in business. Show me how you succeeded in school. Show me how you have made progress with your previous assignment. You do not just aspire to leadership if you cannot demonstrate that you've done this in the past. That's what is called meritocracy. But when you come in and do rabble rousing, like somebody mentioned in the hall, without anything to show about your past competence, I will not vote for you. And I think that is the main challenge we have with African politics. We do not display, we do not showcase our competence. We showcase our tribe, we showcase our religion, we showcase how much money we have, and begin to use money to politicize. I think for me, that is the fundamental challenge. If I don't see your past, if I don't see your credibility, if I don't see your credentials, I should never vote for you. And I think our politics should begin to go in that direction.
So I want to get your final comment, and let me start with you, Casmel. If you were to recommend a way forward, what is the one essential issue you think should be implemented in order to transform Africa's youth belt from potential to a demographic dividend?
I would still say we need a political awakening, and I hate to be that guy, but the personal is deeply political. And for us to do that, it will be for us to rethink and reimagine what the world is. I think part of it will be for us to establish goodwill amongst each other, and for us to see who's looking for the most amount of collective good. Because then it means, as a young person, the only time I will be able to enter politics for me to have anything substantial is in my 30s. But we are saying, and I think these questions just show that these things work because we are at that tipping point. For us to actualize our potential into kinetic or electric and whatever, we will also need to, one, as we unshackle ourselves from the burden of debt in the West, that still ties back to good governance. As we reaffirm our identity and reclaim our pride as Africans, and remembering that we are so incredibly enough that we do not have to talk a certain kind of way for us to be acceptable. We do not have to walk or dress a certain kind of way. And you've seen this, where as a young person, you have more privilege if you're in a suit than if you're in ragged jeans and dreadlocks. So in trying to do those kinds of things, in the shifting our culture and our politics mentally, we will be able to transform that, because there is a lot of very important information that we miss out on because we think that fluency in English equates to intelligence. We think that if somebody speaks with an accent, they are less intelligible. But as long as we still think like that, the way we can change this effectively is in going into those two places, in our politics and in our education, so that as a society we can come up to this collective social conscience of accepting each other, so that we can be able to grow in leaps and bounds. But as long as we're still beholden to the appeal of the Western gaze, we will not be able to see ourselves. We'll just be white people in black skins.
Nerima?
Find something that interests you, and then find the linkages of how it's connected to governance, how it's connected to politics. Talk about it in your circles. Even if it's every other weekend, make sure it comes up in conversation and share. It's to learn more. Civil disobedience works. What do I mean? Continue shunning the terrible leaders that are around us. It's hurting them. Continue to show publicly that you do not agree with their behavior and you're not willing to put them back into leadership. So that also creates a community of supporting good behavior. And then that way we can also begin to encourage good leaders to enter leadership. So continue to push for accountability even when it's hard.
Edwin, you have the final word.
Accountability is the basis of any society. If our leaders are not accountable to us, we have a saying that the highest office in the land is the office of the citizen. So when young people get involved and see themselves as citizens having the highest authority to determine whether somebody stays in power or otherwise, to that extent we can demand accountability. And that is why I would call on every young person to say, do your best, do your bit in whatever sphere you find yourself first. Demonstrate your capacity. Demonstrate that you are really able to mobilize the collective good. And through that, a critical mass of people with having the same aspiration for collective good can transform governance. And that is why we can demand accountability and get it when we have a critical mass. And I think that, for me, the fundamental shift is that institutions must work and not personalities. And that process can enable us really transform our governance and transform our economies. I would rest my case there.
Very interesting discussion indeed on the potential of Africa's youth. But that's all we have time for on this special edition of Talk Africa, co-produced with TV47. A big thank you to our panel of experts, Kasamuel Makuri, artist and youth activist, Nerima Wako Ojiwa, executive director at Siasa Place, Edwin Ikuhoria, international development and policy advocacy expert. And thank you to our audience, students from Daystar University. Thank you very much for joining us today. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and X. And you can watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again next week for more Talk Africa.
This has been a co-production between CGTN and TV47. We took 2 weeks to talk to young people about the challenges that they're facing, the potentials, and indeed how to empower them. Do let us know what you think about this particular subject. My name is Victor Moyakane from TV47. We'll see you again, but for now, it's goodbye.